On September 27th, Hurricane Helene ravaged western North Carolina, causing widespread destruction across the greater Asheville area. 5 local musicians banded together to raise money for aid, and the Caverns of Gold music compilation was born. 280 performers are featured on the compilation. Each episode of this podcast goes in depth with the artists that brought their gifts to this compilation to help Western Carolina. I'm your host, Kelly Menace, and this is the Caverns of Gold podcast.
If I could make it up to you, don't you think I'd try? If I could live 1,000 years.
Lenoir native John Hawkins is a multi-instrumentalist mostly known around Asheville as the drummer in power pop trio John Kirby and the New Seniors. But John has also been a singer-guitarist in rock bands for several decades. John currently operates the Yancys, a recording project with many North Carolina and regional artists participating in the band's indie pop sound, reminiscent of mid-90s hard-on-the-sleeve big guitar power pop. I spoke to John about the difference between being in front of a band and being behind a band, and how a surprise benefactor helped rebuild his home studio when Helene's floodwaters invaded his basement. What is the first musical memory that you can remember?
So the first musical memory I have is being in the car with my mom, and I was probably 3 or 4, and it's Paul McCartney Band on the Run. And it kind of set the stage for everything that I love about music. I'm a huge Beatles fan. I've seen McCartney twice recently, like in the last 10 years. And it took me a while to realize the connection and like why I was always such a Beatles fan and why it's that memory that you just asked me about, right? My earliest memory is Paul McCartney Band on the Run and being in the car with my mom.
Your parents listened to a lot of music? Were they players at all?
My parents were not. My dad listened to the AM radio every morning, right? I would wake up and a local AM station on, and then in the car, they always had the FM station, right, in the 70s. So the regional FM stations. So that's what I really grew up on. I had 3 siblings, older siblings, who I would raid their record collections, but none of them played an instrument outside of school band.
So you were listening to their records. What was the first one that you bought?
The first record that I bought was Cheap Trick Live at Budokan.
And this was when you were you like still 7 or 8? Were you a teenager by then?
I was in 5th grade, and I had older neighborhood friends who did play music, who played guitar. And my friend Alex played that record for me, and I was immediately drawn in. And it was a double album. It was $5.99 at Woolworth, and I rode my bike to the mall and bought it at Woolworth for $5.99.
When did it just kind of occur to you that this was something you could do as opposed to something that you could just put on the record player?
I wanted to be Bunny Carlos, actually, when I got that record. He looked like a normal guy. And I was a normal, nerdy-looking kid. I wasn't a cool kid. And my friend who also played guitar was kind of a cool kid. And I always looked at that band as there's 2 cool guys and there's 2 guys that look normal, right? And I related to that. And I wanted to be Bunny Carlos in 5th grade.
Yeah, you had the 2 hot model-looking dudes, and then the 2 guys. Well, one guy that looked like he worked at a candy store, and then the guy it looked like he sold insurance.
Right. And I was just really drawn to it all. The music, the way the drums sounded, and So it was like this dual thing of I loved the drums, but I also loved the songs. And I always felt like I was a guitar player stuck in a drummer's body because I love loud electric guitar. I think I love all those things because of Cheap Trick, to be honest.
Cheap Trick inspires you to do it. You wanted to be Bunny Carlos, but at that time, when you decided to start playing music, were you playing drums or playing guitar?
So I was playing drums because that's what was needed. So my friends already had the guitar and bass covered, right? And my friend Alex, who introduced me to Cheap Trick, also had a drum set. So he kind of showed me just the basics of, you know, of keeping time. And I would go to his house and practice. So really it was kind of out of necessity because everyone else had the other instruments already covered. Within probably the next year and a half, 2 years, I begged my parents for a drum set. My dad took me to the pawn shop on my birthday, and I got a cheap Japanese, $100 drum set. That was kind of the progression from that, first listening to Cheap Trick and kind of starting to jam with my friends. That all happened kind of at the same time.
At what point did it become a serious thing for you?
Okay, so I think high school, right, it went I started delving into how do we play gigs? How do we play shows? Because that right, you're playing with your friends, you're playing in the basement, maybe some other neighborhood kids see you, but where does it progress from there? So, just guys that I met in high school. I
And
think
this
it
was
was a
where?
this was in Lenoir, North Carolina, right? So an
Okay.
hour from outside of Asheville. So I hooked up with some guys in my high school who were players, who a couple of them still play to this day and like are doing like some really kind of well bigger things than I am. But I initially started playing with those guys in 11th grade, and we started playing metal and with the occasional police cover or maybe song of the day thrown in there. I think we did Power Station, we did Bang a Gong potentially. That was one of the songs we did, but we were doing Van Halen covers and all the metal stuff of the mid '80s we were doing. And I played with some guys who were really phenomenal players, better guitar players than I was a drummer at the time. But you play with people who are better than you, you get better. And so I was lucky to play with some guys that knew what they were doing. And yeah, I learned. That's how I learned. I learned from listening to records and then playing with those guys that were better than me.
And then you took off for college, and it was, and I may be wrong about this, but it was your college band that had a bit of momentum and a little bit of attention paid to it.
That's right. So I was in Boone. I was at App State, and I played drums in a band called Junk Flower that was pretty locally popular. And we played with another local band called the Pygmies, and my really good friend John Leeds, who I still collaborate with today. He was the drummer for the Pygmies. Another friend of ours was starting a band, and he asked me to come play drums. I couldn't come. I couldn't show up the day that that they were going to practice. I had to work. So the other John, my friend John, showed up instead, and all of a sudden he became the drummer for that band. And they said, if we need another guitar player, though, we know you kind of play guitar. Would you like to join? And so, with my very basic guitar skills, I joined this band, Sticky, and ended up becoming the co-front man. And that's when I started writing songs. Chip Taylor, who was the other front person in that band, I owe him a lot of credit too because he kind of taught me how to write songs and how to formulate how you build a song really and how you put it together. And once he showed me that, I was hooked in on songwriting at that point too. But that band, you ask about the momentum, we garnered a lot of local attention and regional attention, and we caught the ear of David Lowery from Cracker, who invited us to his studio in Richmond, Virginia, where we did a demo and then eventually put out an EP on his Pitch a Tent label just as we broke up, which is kind of the story, right? Bands, you make a record and then you break up. So that was in 1997. But that's the band that I really became a songwriter and learned how to do something other than playing drums. I had always lived. I think, like I said, I wanted to be a guitar player, and I'm not a good guitar player, but I'm capable of playing my own songs.
I wonder at what point when you're a drummer and you're, playing with people that you decided, well, I want to do this guitar thing too. How did that come about?
I always loved electric guitar, and I mentioned, or just guitar in general, and I mentioned my friend Chip. The other person is my friend Chris Church, who's also from Lenoir, who also really contributed to helping me learn how to write songs. And I think I just had this love for melody and songs that dated back. That again I tie back to the Beatles and Band on the Run, and then even Cheap Trick. And so I had this dual love of I wanted to do the rhythm, right, the rhythm piece, but I love melody. And it was just again by chance with Sticky. Someone had already taken the drum seat, and they were all my friends. We all worked at a record store together. So I was like, just, do you want to play guitar? And it was like an opportunity. And it was almost, I don't want to say it was a joke, but I don't know how serious I took it. And I think because I didn't take it serious, I didn't care if I messed up, right? I didn't care if I made mistakes. And then all of a sudden it became serious. So I think I always had this love and this affinity for it. I used to daydream about it years before that, man, if I could play guitar and what would I play? And it was a Gibson SG, and that's my main guitar. That's what I ended up playing. So, like, I don't want to say I manifested it, but I used to visualize myself doing it. I was, drummer that wanted to be a front man. It's made me a better drummer as well, right? Because I try really hard not to get in the way of the song. And I don't know that I did that when I was younger. I think I overplayed, and so I think it's really taught me how to play to the song and help me understand what not to play. I think there's an advantage to being a drummer and being a songwriter, and vice versa, as I mentioned a moment ago. But I mean, hey, I'm not Dave Grohl, right? But
No, but I think
I,
that's the first person that people would think of as
yep,
far as a drummer turned front person.
right,
I was inspired as much by Lenny Kravitz and
yeah,
Jay Mascis and Todd Rundgren and the other folks
Todd,
that I knew that were good drummers
Stevie
were
Wonder,
Stevie Wonder. Yeah.
man, right?
Yeah.
Paul
Right.
McCartney, right?
So
Yeah,
the idea of being a drummer and also being a guitar playing songwriter, it wasn't completely foreign to me. But Dave, for better or worse, I mean, he's kind of the most famous. So I mean, it's okay. I'm fine with him being the person that people think of when they think of this thing that both you and I have done.
he could have just rested on the work that he did with Nirvana, and even the work he did with Queens of the Stone Age, and rested on that and been one of the best rock drummers of all time, right? But you got all this whole other piece to him. I love both of them. I love playing drums. I'm fortunate that I've been able to play drums in John Kirby and the New Seniors, because I didn't think I would really have an opportunity to play live, to play in a band, to play drums again. I was fortunate that I got to play with even with the beginnings of one of your bands, right? Because I thought that those days were done for me. So really being in Asheville and meeting really in these last 5 to 6 years, I started playing again and playing live. I'd stopped. And
So after Sticky was over,
yeah,
that's late 90s,
yeah,
and that's 25 in between that and John
yeah.
Kirby and the New Seniors. During that period of time, were you just not active?
So there's a kind of this lost period. I moved to Texas. I left Boone in '97. I moved to Austin, Texas. I had a band there, Poly Boy, that I led, and I was the songwriter and the singer, guitar player. Did that for 3 or 4 years. After lived in Austin for almost 6 years, and I did that for about 3 or 4 years. So I had a band there. Played drums in a couple of different projects. Played around Texas, Houston, San Antonio, which was really a great experience. Ended up moving back to North Carolina. That's how I ended up in Asheville, my wife and I, right? And really moved back here and just was continuing to write songs and record in my basement as the Yancys. I just came up with this name. I liked the sound of it. I wanted it to sound like almost like a family, even though it was really me with just friends that I would invite to play because those folks are like family to me. And kind of named it after Yancey County, right, which is a neighboring county. I wanted it to almost sound like a bluegrass band, family band name, right? So that's was my next thing after Texas. That was really a recording project that I've done in Asheville. I've done 2 records worth of music, and I don't play drums on any of that. My friend John Leeds, back from the Boone days, and who was the drummer in Sticky. I don't want it to be, "Hey, look, John's playing this and John's playing the drums too." No, I really try to do it as a band even though we don't perform. And so I don't play drums on any of those songs, which I do on purpose, right? I don't play on those on purpose.
Something that I've noticed personally about when I play every instrument on a recording, that it's never as interesting than if I have other people to collaborate with.
I 100% agree with what what you said there, right? It's not as interesting. I do have some songs and recordings that I've done all like as you mentioned, I either play most of it or all of it. It's not as interesting. One of the things I love is I start this recording and then I'm like in the days of what we do today, right? A lot of file sharing because I don't some of the folks that I will ask to contribute don't live nearby, don't live in Asheville, right? So the file sharing, I love how I get a track and it totally transforms the song. And it's to the point that the first time you hear it, it's almost foreign when you add their part. The second time, "Oh, this makes a little more sense." By the third time, I'm hooked, and it's totally transformed the song. Those are the moments of magic in my book, right? When you've got somebody else who's got a totally different perspective, and they're gonna play a melody line or a part that I haven't conceptualized at all, and all of a sudden it makes sense, or it completely takes the song, it lifts it, it elevates it, makes it something entirely different. Man, I'm getting chills saying talking about it because that's the moment of magic for me in the collaboration that you just talked about.
Have you ever had to completely rewrite a song based around something that someone sends you?
I think the thing that I want to mention when we're talking about collaboration, one of the things that even if I've written a song, and I think you were talking about this, when you've written a song, it's pretty much completed. I find the process of actually working with another drummer helps me refine the arrangement. And a lot of times I will change the arrangement based on the initial drum track. And I'm like, well, wait a minute, this has me going in a different direction. So it's more of I don't know if it's rewriting the song. It's more I tend to change the arrangement, or it gives me an idea for a different arrangement.
It's part of the problem with the way that you have to work in that you're not in a room with other musicians banging it out. And if there were you and 3 other people banging the song out in real time in a garage or a basement or such, you would naturally, "Oh, hey, that part, play that part again." And then on the spot, "Hey, let's do this instead."
Hmm.
Instead of with a recording, you don't really get that sort of back and forth. The recording is static, and you have to choose either to use the recording as it is or change what you do to fit around the recording.
It is not the same dynamic that you just mentioned, right? That in John Kirby and the New Seniors, that's exactly what we do. We just bang it around in the same room together. But when you're collaborating with other people and they don't, you don't have that opportunity, you're exactly right. I don't want to say it's less flexible, but you're working with what you're working with, right? And they've spent the time to create this track for you. And a lot of times they have limited time, right? I'm not going to get 15 takes from someone. So maybe Kelly, if I think about this a little bit, I probably have had to make adjustments and or the part sonically takes a space maybe that I was thinking for something else that then I don't add to it. So yeah, it has definitely, I would say, changed maybe my initial thought of what the song would sound like. And again, definitely the arrangement piece. I've definitely made changes there.
Have you ever been tempted to make the Yancys a band in a conventional sense?
Yes. I think it would be easier now because with being in John Kirby and the New Seniors, I've met so many great musicians in Asheville that are part of the scene. And I think it would be much easier now to put a band together because I know and have relationships with people. I struggle to do multiple projects at one time because I have kids, right? I have a job and I have other things that I do, but I also sometimes have this feeling that whatever I'm doing musically, I want to give everything to it. And I don't like to dilute myself, or I think I have this thing that I think I'm diluting myself, but I am writing new songs right now for the Yancys, and in fact, I've got 3 that I'm collaborating with a couple of people right now to finish, and my thought process would be to try to perform them live. Not just these 3, but the new songs I am writing, I would like to perform live.
How do you describe the Yancey sound to people when somebody asks you, "Oh, what do you sound like? What do you do?"
I tie it back to I think kind of what I mentioned is it's pop. It's kind of indie pop. Sticky was an indie rock band, but again, with a really good sense of melody. And so I try to make it pop music with loud guitars and kind of this indie sensibility. I don't write story songs. I write really, I think, thematically about the human condition is where I come from. So most of my songs they're not as much story. I'm not really a storyteller. But the last record I did, it was inspired by the political craziness in the US, right? It was in 2018, and I'm writing protest music right now, kind of what we're going through currently. So that is my focus.
Is there any sort of connection between the Yanceys and the New Seniors beyond the fact that you're just in both of them? Does the music that you make on your own influence the New Seniors in any sort of way, or and vice versa? Your work in the New Seniors, has that changed what the Yanceys accomplishes?
That's a great question. And really, I try to keep them totally separate. The in John Kirby, the New Seniors, I play drums, sing some backup, but John is the songwriter, right? And it's always been that way, and it's always agreed upon that it was that way. And it's not that John came in and said, "I'm the songwriter." It's no, I'm the drummer, right? And that's what I wanted to be. So I'm not trying to bring songs for John Kirby and the New Seniors. I think where I contribute to the songs and where, even though John writes them, is just potentially with nuance or with, arrangements. But I think what I've learned from that I love that John Kirby does is he writes great pre-choruses, and I've never been really a pre-chorus guy. So on a couple of the new tunes that I'm working on right now, I've consciously tried to, without forcing it, but try to work in. I'm a fan of that, and so that's one thing that I've picked up from John. I think John is a great songwriter. I think he's got a really good feel for structure, and yeah, so I think certainly that's something I'm going to lift from him.
Silver Ships is the song that you donated to the Caverns of Gold compilation. Can you tell us a little bit about that song?
That song is really a song about climate change, and so I felt like it was an appropriate song for the compilation. That was a song that I wrote as part of that last body of work that I put together for the last Yancys record. That song has my friend Chris Church playing slide guitar. He's featured on that. My good friend John Leeds playing drums on it. And then a good friend of mine from Richmond, Virginia, who's in a great Richmond band called Bucket, contributed bass guitar. So that's pretty much when I talk about the Yancys, those are the folks that I really rely on. Chad Nance, who was in the New Seniors, also contributes to the Yancys. So there is some tie-in there between the two bands. I initially started working with John Kirby because I went to see his band, Dr. Bacon, and I thought he was a fantastic guitar player. So I asked him to play on that Yancys record. So that is how John and I started playing together. I have a connection to John through his father. John Kirby Sr. was when I was in college, he was my boss at the record store. So John Kirby's dad had a huge influence on the music that I listened to. So we have a connection through his dad, a common musical mentor. That's certainly part of the story that I hadn't talked about previously.
Folks who want to know a little bit more about the John Kirby story can tune in to the 3rd episode of the Caverns of Gold podcast. We spent about an hour talking with John Kirby about writing songs and the connection, about his father being pretty much his greatest influence on his music and how he writes songs and what inspires him. Tell us a little bit about your hurricane story.
The morning of Helene, I woke up to the sound of trees falling on my neighbor's house, and it was frightening. I gathered, my family, my wife and I, we gathered our kids. We moved into the basement. We moved to the basement of our home. In the basement of the home is also my studio space. It's where I record all of the Yancys material, 90% of the John Kirby and New Seniors material. It's our practice space. It's my studio workspace. So we're down in this area of my basement, right next to the studio, and a tree falls on my neighbor's home on the other side. So like there's trees that have hit both of my neighbors' homes. And so we're just huddled in the basement, hoping that doesn't happen. And I look down and there's water pooling on my floor that is now entering in under the foundation of my home. So water is flooding my basement. There's no way to stop it. So I jump up, I walk into the next room, which is the studio, and it's coming in the studio, and all of our instruments are in there for John Kirby and the Seniors, all of my recording equipment. Most of it was not on the ground, but certainly some of it was. So I'm in this frenzy of there's trees falling. I mean, it's in the midst of the highest, probably when the rainfall and the wind was the strongest. So after a kind of a moment of like, what the heck do I do? It's started putting instruments on top of furniture, just knowing that things were going to get, we can't stop the water coming in. All the while my family is trying to bail. We formed basically a line where we had trash cans and cups, and we're trying to bail as much water as we can out and put it into the utility sink that's also in the basement. We did that for about 4.5 hours until the water subsided. The whole time trying to move instruments, hoping that my house didn't get hit by a tree. And I went outside at one point and there was all this water rushing down the ridge because I was trying to figure out where the water was coming in, and I could see it hitting my home and underneath the foundation. I thought, are we in danger of a landslide? Little did I know that was actually happening and people had perished in a landslide right in the Fairview area of the county. And man, it was really surreal. And then it stopped. So it was like this 4 to 5 hour period of frenzy. And then I guess the rain stopped. And I don't think we really still realized how bad it was. No cell service, right? I'd lost contact with some of my work colleagues, one of whom I knew was already on the roof of his home. I had no idea what had happened, right? So started talking to our neighbors. I mean, literally, there were 4 homes right around me that all had trees on them, and we feel very lucky. Even though my house flooded in the basement and we had to go through that, there's people that lost their homes. Like all the crazy, terrible things. We are super fortunate, and I realize that. But I didn't realize the extent of it that day until we got out and we tried to drive around and tried to find a cell signal. And some of my friends who don't live here were telling me what they were seeing on the news, and it was surreal. I was expecting a lot of rain and wind. I knew it would be bad, but I've never been through something like that. It was terrifying, honestly. When we finally got out, we
Folks
drove
in the
around.
Asheville area have lots of
We drove to
opportunities
North
to see
Asheville,
Jenny and Moonwater
and I was
perform
kind of
live
shocked to see
between the
how many
various open mic
trees
nights,
and just the
residencies, and
random
curated
cars
performances.
crushed,
You can
trees
follow
on
Moonwater
houses,
on Facebook
like
and
everywhere.
Instagram.
And so at that point, I started to understand that, man, this is bad. This is not just a storm that, hey, there's a couple trees down here and there. There's trees down everywhere. And there was so much debris and damage and destruction that, well, that really to me remained untouched for so long. In January, right? In February, you're still driving down and seeing all the things in the river. Again, they are cleaning it. One of the biggest shockers for me was after we were without power in my home for for about 20 days without water, right? Of course, without any utilities. We got those back, and that felt a little bit like normal again, right? Because now I have power and I can flush the toilet, right? I can do whatever. I've got potable water I can get from a distribution station. So it was manageable. It started to feel normal. But then I had to go to Swannanoa, and I was shocked because I drove through some of the neighborhoods by the river, right off of 70, and the destruction and people's belongings out on like everything that they owned on the street. And that was shocking to see, right? You can't rebuild all those things overnight. And with all the foliage off the trees, you could see back into these areas where there's just destruction. And so I'm also interested to see what it looks like when the green is back. It's been a long haul. I think there's been a lot of progress made, but I know it's going to still take a while. One thing that's really resonated with me is that after times of uncertainty, and even with some of the local venues, right? With the pandemic, there was so much uncertainty. I think there was a lot of uncertainty, um, and it's been great to see that most of the venues have survived, right, and continued to. The scene is back. The music scene seems normal. That seemed to happen really before the end of the year. Those things are all positive, right?
When we came back from COVID, people wanted to go out with a vengeance. Like they had been cooped up
Yeah.
and couldn't wait to be released. I almost feel like there was a little bit of a reticence for people to come back out initially after the hurricane. And the first time that I was out, people were kind of gathered in corners, hushed, and wanting to tell each other their hurricane stories and ask, are you okay? Did you make it okay? Are your people okay? And I didn't really feel that coming back from COVID.
There was almost this guilt, right? I think that because there was so much destruction and people missing right here, and you didn't really. I don't know that we've even gotten a full accounting of what the casualties, right? And I think there was still this uncertainty. It did feel a little bit like we're doing this and people are still suffering and they're living in tents, right? I agree. There was this feeling, but art is what helps people deal with life, in my opinion, right? People say music saved my life. Like you hear people say that different times when they were down. That's not fake or wrong, right? There are times in my life where that's what I had to retreat to. That's the thing that got me through the night because I could focus on that instead of what was wrong. And so I think it's not a responsibility, but you've got to carry on. Life goes on. You have to keep doing what you're doing. People need art. They need music. I need it. And I hope that by producing it, that other people enjoy it. But ultimately, I'm doing it to feel better for myself. It brings me a lot of joy, right? And that's why I do it. And I hope that other people can enjoy it. But I think it's important in those times that we don't forget the importance of it because it helps.
What's next for the Yancys?
I'm collaborating with Rod Kite, who is again was in the band Hard Rocket. I've working with him a little bit, and then with my friend John Leeds right now to flesh the songs out. I'm going to be recording those in the space that was flooded. I really want to just speak to this for one moment. The musiccares.org is a music assistance group, a charity that helps musicians. all musicians, right? Not just famous musicians, right? They were available to musicians in this town, right? They are available to help in times of natural disaster. I applied for a grant through Music Cares that enabled me to replace the carpeting, replace the soundproofing in my practice space, right? I would not be able to start recording these songs, utilize the space without that assistance. I mean, honestly, it enabled me to get that done rather quickly, and then the excess money I also used for repairs on my home because I don't have flood insurance because I don't live in a floodplain, right? But my house was still flooded. It's going to be the first thing that's been recorded in the space since the hurricane. John Kirby and the New Seniors had just finished recording right at the end of the summer before the hurricane. So the next project is going to be in the refurbished studio that I was able to refurbish with help from musiccares.org.
And how will people be able to find this?
Bandcamp is my preferred platform. They are the most artist friendly. And so it will eventually be on all streaming platforms, but I typically try to steer people to my Bandcamp page. So if you go to Bandcamp, you can look up the Yancys. I've got releases available there now.
Folks can find the Yancys recordings on bandcamp.com. Caverns of Gold is hosted and produced by Kelly Minnis, and he wrote and performed the theme music. Caverns of Gold can be found on Facebook and Instagram, as well as at cavernsofgold.bandcamp.com. Thank you for listening.